welcome everybody as we still have more people coming in. I just want to basically say thanks for doing this on a Friday afternoon, but I'm excited about doing this. This is something that we started, mid-pandemic 2 years ago now, and we continue to do it. And I started reaching out. The way it all worked was, just so you'll know, I sit in the middle of providers and suppliers. I'm that guy that's right in the middle. Basically, I have groups of hospital CEOs, supply chain, as well as pharmacy leaders, and we bring them together several times a year, and I'm in the middle. I do that. But during pandemic, people started saying, you know, hey, have you heard anything? What do you know? And I was like, well, I'm kind of in the same boat as many of you. But I started reaching out to friends and experts and providers that I knew, and we started bringing them together online, just like this. And so continue to do that. I love doing what I do, and it's a ton of fun. And so with that being said, we've got a couple other of these presentations planned in the next coming weeks. So if you have a topic, know of an expert that might like to present, I'd love to talk to you about it, because I do think these are fun for me to do. And I think it's a pretty good service for everybody. So I would encourage you to give me some names and some ideas. All right, so now we're going to get started. I told you this one, we're going to hop right into it. And so Joe Walsh, I've known for many, many years. And about 2.5 years ago, Joe did a presentation for us as well that was really well received. And so, as I mentioned, I began to reach out to experts a couple years ago to do these things. And Joe was one of them, because clearly everybody knows Joe, or if not, they should. But here's a little background on Joe: 24 years of progressive supply chain leadership experience in 3 different industries, which is unique. He led Intermountain Healthcare to award-winning supply chain transformation. They won all kinds of awards. Everybody knows that. And there he was serving as the chief supply chain officer. Also, he's been on multiple different companies. He's led sales there. He's carried the bag, so he knows what it's like calling on, the different people and different executives. And now he also does a lot of executive coaching with many of the people who you probably are calling on now, actually. He's really good at that, and he's just a really connected guy, and he's going to have something really good to talk about. Also, Janelle, who recently joined him, actually, I think she's been with him not too terribly long, but she's not her first day in the industry. She's been almost 40 years being in the industry. She is the last 15 years, she worked for Lab, and she was in part of their IDN and GPO leadership there. A lot of experience in key account management programs, and she is a wealth of knowledge. So combined with those two, they're really, really good at what they do. And so with that being said, I'm going to pull them up here, and we're going to turn it over to Joe and Janelle. They almost sounds like a duo, don't y'all think? Maybe in Nashville, that would be kind of like a good acoustic group here. But I'm going to turn it over to Joe, and I'm going to get out of here, and we'll come back. But last thing, I'm going to be hitting you up in the chat. With questions. If you have a question for him, once you get going, chat me. I'll make sure that we get it out. You can either do it to the group or me personally, and we'll do it that way. But anyway, Joe, Janelle, here we go. Let's go.
It sounds awesome. It's nice to see many familiar faces and names, and actually see some new ones as well. We also have Michelle Klaus with us today. I see Michelle's name down there as well. Michelle, you're more than welcome to come on camera as we kind of go through this as well. She's part of our Sherpas team here as well. So just the way we're going to break this next, let's say hour down or next 50 minutes down, is we're going to take about half the time and go through some content to cover the objectives that you signed up for, which are, why change? Why is change even necessary? Which I suspect is the part of the story you're really, really familiar with, right? What's changed in the last 3 years? And we're not going to cover the changes. We're going to cover a summary of about 550 conversations that we've been having with providers, and then bring some of those insights forward in a very distilled manner. We only have so much time, so we'll try to be quick and high level with that. And then we want to get into, well, then if we're in your shoes, and we're assuming that most of you are here representing, supplier organizations, manufacturers, distributors, but more on the selling side of the equation, well, then what do you do about it? What is the set of changes you might want to kind of implement within your organization as you head into 2023? And then the next logical question will be, well, then how do you implement those changes? Can we cover all that in the next 20 minutes? No, it's way too much stuff, right? But we'll try to provide some framework. And then what that framework might do is inspire some of your questions where you want to go deeper in the second half of the conversation. And of course, we're always open to additional conversations outside of this, but we thought that might be a good way to kind of, grease the skids as we head into 2023, to give you the appropriate insights, or at least know where to get them. And then of course, give you some frameworks that you can be reactive to. So with that, I would encourage you to ask the questions, even as we're going through this. Hayes is moderating and we'll bring those questions to our attention. I certainly welcome the interruption from Hayes as we're going through it to make sure that we are meeting your needs as we go through this. And for our providers that are with us today, please contribute, right? Please contribute as we go through this conversation. I think that's what a lot of our supplier organizations need, is the calibration to know what your needs are, what your pains are, what your experience has been. Because in many cases, they're asking and they just don't know. And that's why they're here today. So with that, I'm going to jump into it, Hayes, if that's all right.
Let's go. Let's get it going. I'm excited.
Okay. So I'm going to skip the bios and go straight to the 550 interviews. So back in March of 2020, when our world changed, what I started to do was just to make phone calls, right? I mean, I had no idea what to do at that point in time. As a small company, it was like, what do you do except just be in service to people, reach out to them. And my primary interest was just to make sure people were okay. I mean, there were several of you on this call that I called just to check in on and say, how are you doing? And I was more concerned about you as a human being than I was about your business. But in the course of the conversation about you as a human being, we actually learned a lot about what you were experiencing. And so at one point, I talked to providers and suppliers, but this conversation, I'm going to try to keep focused on the provider part of the conversation. At the end of every conversation, I asked every provider, how are you feeling about the world you're living in today? And this is over the last, let's say, almost 3 years. So this isn't just a snapshot in time as March 2020. It's been since then, these 550 conversations. The top 3 feelings or emotions that these leaders are feeling: embarrassed, overwhelmed, misunderstood, and then at times fatigued. Now that's changing, right? Certainly changing now that we're kind of coming out of the crisis and it's becoming more of a recovery. There's more optimism, but there's still overwhelm. There's still fatigue. These folks have not had time off. They're in a hybrid work environment. Their entire kind of ecosystem has changed around them. Expectations have increased. They're now in a financial crisis. And so we've also distilled a series of themes that have kind of come out of these conversations around what's happening on the provider side. So what we want to do is give you some framework to react to. When we look at the provider landscape, and you can have these slides, right? We'll make sure that Hayes sends these out after. Each of these, of course, has double clicks into them, and we don't have time to go through all of them today, but there's obviously significant policy and regulatory changes that are always on the horizon. That could be a conversation in and of itself, right? There are many experts that can talk about this, and I'm not in any way trying to overstep, my areas of expertise, but there's lots of policies and regulatory changes that your provider customers are dealing with. There's also what is newer, is this financial perfect storm that I would be remiss not to at least pause on and emphasize. It is like circa 2008 all over again. It's that level of intensity and disruption where you've got revenue compression coupled with hyperinflation, and that's on the labor side and all the rest of the stuff side, right? All of you as the manufacturers recognize a lot of those cost increases that you're experiencing are being passed through to the providers, who then don't have the ability to pass it through to the patients or to the insurance companies. So they're actually sitting on that margin compression. They're experiencing investment losses on paper, which, again, just like you are in your 401k, it's been a really, really rough year. And then days cash on hand is obviously dwindling. So it is a perfect recipe for the CFOs to be coming back to supply chain saying, can you please save the day? Because if you don't, we have to start impacting clinicians at the bedside. And it is as intense as it was in 2008. So I just want to make sure that I emphasize this, because they have gone from one crisis, let's say COVID, straight into another one without any breathing room. And also what's happened is you've got a changing ecosystem. Industry consolidation has been slowing because of the financial markets, but it is still going on, and you have a lot of them distracted with a lot of M&A integration. Even companies that previously didn't do this are now wrapped up in M&A integration activities, which take years to take place. Digital transformation, lots of digital transformation taking place, which is a conversation in and of itself, which I would love to have at a separate time. Care delivery models that are changing very, very rapidly, which again, those are conversations in and of themselves. And then for the first time that I've experienced it since my time in healthcare, on this first page of macro trends at the provider level, supply chain is front page news. It's its own category. That's pretty unbelievable. I mean, historically speaking, you'd have to double click into one of these other topics to get into a supply chain related conversation. Not this time, right? Supply chain is now front page news, and we are going to talk about some of those things that's going on. So let's do that. Let's double click on number 6 and say what's going on inside the world of supply chain. What are some of those trends that we've been picking up on as we're talking to some of these supply chain leaders? First, expanded goals. So their goals are now not only cost savings. Yes, it's still cost savings, but it's also supply continuity or building a more resilient supply chain. It's also inflation containment, right? How do they actually contain the inflation? So these are some of the goals that they have that weren't really there or as defined as they were in the past. It's not only cost savings as it probably was previously. ESG, big push. That is actually, it doesn't mean every organization, but if it is important for that organization, boy, is it important. It's really important. And underestimate this one to your own peril. Strategic relevance. I think we all recognize supply chain now has the undivided attention of the C-suite. Some of them are actually really glad to be there. Some of them were already there, but for some of those that have the bright light now kind of in their eyes, some of them, frankly, are hoping that they can just go back to the way it was because they don't know what to do now that they have the spotlight. It's a very, very kind of awkward place to be because now the expectation line is so high and they haven't received the investments that they need to do the next level of things that their organization's expecting them to do, or the time to make those investments actually pay off. New strategies. Wow, they've got some new strategies that, I mean, I wish we could spend the entire time focusing on. Those new strategies are pretty profound. Different sourcing strategies, like not all categories are the same. They're doing category segmentation, supplier segmentation. They're looking at when to sole source, when to dual source, when to multi-source. When do they do nearshoring? When do they do local sourcing? Supply continuity now being of equal importance to clinician preference, which means, you know, you coming and trying to sell into clinicians alone is not going to get it done in today's world. It didn't before, really, but now it really won't get it done today. Streamline decision rights to be able to make decisions faster. Having a more strategic and intentional relationship with GPOs and distributors. Those relationships have changed overnight. And then of course, for some, even vertical integration, right? Even getting into manufacturing businesses, which is pretty astounding when you think about where the industry was 3 years ago. On the logistics side, and I'm only highlighting a couple of these just to bring some emphasis to it. Inventory management policies that have changed, where just in time has now become just in case. Is it an overcorrection in some cases? Yep, it is. Just like just in time was an overcorrection in some cases. But you got massive shifts in inventory management strategies, a shift back towards self-distribution in a really significant way. Investments into demand sensing and demand planning, massive expectations of you to actually be transparent and to be visible and give them visibility into your upstream supply chains. And of course, you know, being more proactive with what I'll call demand-driven supply shortages, but still not quite having a handle on, you know, what we'll call supply driven shortages. So again, those require probably deeper conversations. New relationships. Again, I just don't want to skip over some of these because they're such profound shifts in what they're expecting of you. What they're expecting is a solution, not a product. No one's buying features and benefits any longer. They weren't before, but they're really not now. They want ops to ops collaboration. So your ops team, not you as sales, like step aside for a moment. They want your ops team to talk to their ops team. They want direct collaboration. They want supply guarantees with prioritized allocations, if allocations is even the right strategy. Value-based contracts. They want to be able to do like things like S&OP planning and CPFR, acronyms we all really need to know what those things mean, because they want to be able to do collaborative planning and forecasting with you. Product pedigree, to understand if your product is comprised of 15 sub parts, then how does that product break down and where is it being manufactured and by whom around the world? Because they have to de-risk the supply chain on their critical products. They're looking at performance management, like how do they manage their most important suppliers? Are you participating in the industry collaboratives like HERC that they're actually really caring about? And then of course, they're outsourcing or leaning on you for more services because they don't have the time and they can't get access to the resources. So lots of things are changing. The talent imperative, that's my own personal thing. I'm glad to hear supply chain folks talking about it. More specifically, the strategies are still evolving quickly. I'm going to be quick with this slide because you can have these slides, right? I want to make sure that Janelle has the time to go through like the what and the so what. There's a lot of things that have changed. The bigger getting bigger. Why does that matter to you? Well, because you have to segment, right? You have segmentation matters more than ever. Hybrid work is here to stay. Why does it matter to you? Because learning how to do virtual selling isn't going to go away. It's an essential. Supply chain maturity, again, widely varies across IDNs. Why does that matter to you? Because you have to know how to do supply chain diagnostics, right? There's all these things around massive changes that dramatically impact the capabilities that you need as a sales organization moving forward. And I'm not going to go through them all, but it's almost like this has changed and therefore there are pretty profound changes on the right side. And Janelle's going to highlight a couple of these as we get into it. But that's why we're actually presenting and sharing some of these insights today, because some of these things on the left they'll never go back to the way they used to be, which means you can't keep selling the way that you used to because the entire world and the entire ecosystem you're existing in has changed. Okay. The other thing that we've heard is that, we get asked this question often because like Hayes, we sit also between providers and suppliers. We're in a pretty unique business. Half our business, I don't know if it's half, it's been mixed, shifting back and forth, but we have provider clients that we do supply chain transformation with, and we also go in and we'll help them performance improvement. We do competency development, mentoring, coaching with supply chains. And then of course, we help many of you with your sales strategies and sales methodologies and go-to-market strategies. And so we also sit between the two of you. And what we hear very often from those of you on the sales side is, how do we become a more, how do we become a partner? And when you use the capital P partner word, and we would give you following tips as to what we're hearing from the providers and what they're expecting from you. The first is, especially on the heels of COVID, there's a couple of these I'll just emphasize, and again, you can have these. The first is basics before differentiators. So table stakes before differentiators. If you can't do the basics, if you can't get the products that they need reliably from point A to point B, I don't care if you can solve world hunger. It doesn't matter, right? That is what almost every provider is saying. And frankly, that wasn't where things were 3 years ago because there was an assumption that the basics could be done. And then we learned that the basics were not something that could just be assumed. Transparency, when you have visibility to your own supply chain, and I mean this very sincerely, and honesty when you do not, right? Just honesty. I don't know is a better answer than making it up, right? Don't sell futures in the space of transparency, right? I don't know is a much better answer. I don't know when that product's going to be there. I don't know if I can guarantee it is a much better answer than it's going to be fine and then it's not. Segmentation for impact, being able to kind of look at the market differently and have differentiated solutions for different segments. And again, we don't have time to get into all of that just right now. Ops to ops collaboration, like we talked about, becoming an extender to help them actually do the work. So even if you've got solutions that even with a signature on a piece of paper could save them $100,000, if it requires them to do something, they don't have resources to do it. So the more you can help them with the implementation and taking away the barriers to change, the more likely they'll be willing to do it. Value-based contracts, we talked about that before. And then if you're going to offer and push price changes, which I'm not debating, you probably need to pass through some to the providers, then make sure you're willing and able to tie it to raw materials and or labor market indices so that there's rational, logic behind why you're doing it, and that it can then float up and down with those changes in those raw materials or labor costs. So it's not just hey, our cost has gone up, so now your price has gone up. that is very difficult for a provider to absorb. With that, Janelle, I want to make sure you've got the time to go through what do you do about it now if you're in sales, if that's the environment that you're actually trying to navigate, because I empathize with all of you that are in sales. This is not an easy place to be. And the question is, now what do you do with that if you actually have to navigate those hurdles and those headwinds? So Janelle?
Thanks, Joe. I think if we flip our conversation a little bit to the supplier in terms of what they're facing, and if you look at the chief sales officer of the organization, when he or she wakes up, what are they thinking about, right? And they're thinking about their top and bottom line, and they're thinking about how do they improve the customer experience. And here's one that we're really pointing out because it's critical. 50% of their revenue comes from 20% of their sales team members, whether we're talking about a small organization who has a dedicated sales team, or whether you're talking about national accounts, corporate accounts, strategic accounts. The bottom line is 50% of the revenue comes from 20% of the people that you have out there selling or positioning your value prop. So pretty important numbers. And what are they facing? What are they sharing with us every day when they're not successful? And Joel, let's go to the next slide and talk about some of the speed bumps or the challenges that our supplier partners talk about. Sometimes they talk about knocking on the wrong door, or not knocking on enough doors, or not really understanding all the people that were involved in the process. And I can remember leading sales teams or key account teams and learning that, my God, we have 3 or 4 more people that we haven't even touched in the process that are part of the decision-making. So it's a reality for all of us, right? There's a ton of people involved. So make sure we're knocking on the right doors. Bad tactics, Joe mentioned it. I saw Hayes responding to it. If we're still selling the bed or the surgical instrument or whatever it is, if we're selling features and benefits, how that product works or performs overall, we're demonstrating a bad tactic. So we really need to kind of move away from that. And it's a speed bump that we're all facing. Too late. How many of us really thought we had a relationship building and we were in the driver's seat, and the clinical people were telling us, yeah, they're really interested in our solution, only to find out that supply chain or sourcing RFP'd that product or service, even a couple months ago. So it's a reality here that we need to do the right things in the right order to make for a very successful strategy and execution of that strategy. I'll point our direction here to the elaborate trap, right? The mouse trap that sometimes we find ourselves in, and questions that we'd be asking, about our customer in general. Did they see the mice? Did they acknowledge a problem? Did they really acknowledge a problem? Do they want to do something about it now? Have they acknowledged it? Do they think it's important to stop everything else that they're working on right now in their own worlds? And here's the real clincher for me. Do they trust us enough as resources to want to move ahead with us? Are we a trusted resource, right? So those are the 3 areas that often puts us as suppliers into the elaborate trap. And so let's talk about what we can do about it. Some proven methods that we've seen companies adjust to and accept. The first is to assess your IDN, your customer, understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they get paid, right? Profit, not for profit. Are they building? Are they part of M&A activity right now? And I'm not talking about just reading their website. I'm talking about digging down, reading their financials, and really understanding who this customer is. And this takes time and energy on our part as suppliers. Let's move to blueprint. Who to influence, who who's the total group of individuals that we need to influence so that we can successfully impact a decision, right? And with a problem that they have. And I'm going to stop for a second because Joe reminds me often that doing diagnostics, doing deep, powerful questions in this whole process is the key to success. It's like diagnosing an illness, right? You have to be able to understand by asking powerful questions, starting at the macro level most of the time, drilling down through the funnel to really get to who to influence, right? And you need some of the players to tell us who to influence, but you constantly have to put yourself in a diagnostic position to understand what's important and to really move through the process. How to influence, we call it score value language. Are you saying the right things to the right people in their frame of reference, right? Are they an economic person? Are they a clinical person? You can't speak the same love language to those customers when you don't know who they are and what's important to them. So we're going to talk about that in more detail. Get, back to discovery here, which problems to solve. We know they have problems. In some cases, they've communicated what the problems are, but really at a high level to understand the needs and pains are really important. And then lastly, and Joe kind of talked about it, it's about bringing a solution to the table that they need and execute, really delivering what we say we're going to do. So we're going to take a moment and we're going to look at a couple of these tools more closely. Joe, can we bring up RACI? So RACI is a very comprehensive approach to identifying the people that are important in a process. And if you sell many products and services, we really recommend that you do RACI on every problem that exists, every potential opportunity to be a resource, right? And every time you can solve their problem in general. So for instance, if you're selling a bed today, right, as a supplier, you need to go through a RACI model to understand who's responsible, accountable, who you need to consult with and be informed. We find that a lot of people spend their time and energy with the consulting crew and those that need to be informed. They need to spend additional time. When you consider there's 8 to 10 hours in our days, right, as suppliers, we really need to focus our activities and our behaviors on the R's and the A's overall, because we know they're running the process and they're making the decisions. So that's really an important part of moving your business forward. And there could be as many as 15 people in the process, maybe even more, just don't know. Score value language. I'm not sure how many people, I don't know if we can tell by a raise of hands at all, have ever heard of Gary Chapman and the 5 love languages.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe some of you were given the book because a significant other, a partner in your life wanted you to understand them better or listen to them more, right? That was pretty important. And then another book that he wrote was The 5 Languages for Appreciation in the Workplace. And so transcending that message and that content, right? When we look at the people that we're going to need in the process that are really important in the decision-making process, we kind of categorize them into 5 value languages. We call it score value language: strategic, clinical, operational, relationship. And everybody takes some type of economic position, right, when they're making decisions. But that really is, when we talk about value, your ability to understand. If you're looking at your R's and A's in your RACI format, can you diagnose, are these individuals strategic, clinical, operational, or relationship driven? And maybe on one specific project, someone might be strategic, but if you're working on another project with them, they may be relationship driven. So this really is what we call the juicy middle to this process. You have to be able to speak in their language. Providers need you to talk to them about what's important. You might assume in most cases that, let's say, a PA or a nurse, right, might be clinical, but in fact, when they're engaging in a decision for a solution, they might be an operational person. They might have had incredible disaster when they were in servicing or bring new products to the table. So this is critical. We really invite you to take a look at score value language and figure out how this tool might really support your business model moving forward. And Joe, let's talk about matching customer problems to your solutions. I don't think it's much of a secret that our providers, face a lot of challenges, some of them very unique to them, but some of them which they've experienced, our providers perhaps on the East Coast might have had a similar problem statement to those on the West Coast. And if we look at this, this is the opportunity for your organization, for your marketing teams, to your executive teams to match your customer, your problems, the customer's problems and solutions. Your organization has probably provided many solutions that have been very successful in the marketplace. This is your kind of master guide to looking at that. If you're a national accounts person, a corporate accounts, or a sales individual, this is a tool that really helps you shorten the process and provide solutions that, have already been identified for some problems kind of across the country. So again, a lot of the clients that we've worked with have enjoyed putting together the cube to help them get to their true value proposition. Joe?
Great. Yeah, Janelle, what I'll do is I'm going to stop here and maybe open it up for questions by just putting some summary comments on what we've talked about so far. Given the changes that we're experiencing on the provider front, what we're suggesting is like process matters, your process matters. And, we've talked about this, what we call flip the script to win, meaning what we don't want to do is come into the process where you've got, and it happened to me in supply chain, I can't tell you how many times, somebody would come in with their sales deck, their pitch deck, and they had the solution already in mind, usually a product in mind, not even a solution, but they had a product that I desperately needed, and they were trying to convince me of it. So they would, that's peak 5, by the way, and then they would come in and they'd be trying to find my needs or pains that would then match that problem or that solution that they were bringing forward to me. And then throughout the process, they'd be trying to really learn me as an individual so that they could then try to influence me and be more impactful with me. That's peak 3. So they've gone 5, 4, 3. And then lo and behold, at the end of this entire process, they would find out that I had no role in the decision-making process. Rarely does a chief supply chain officer have a role in the decision-making process, because if they had done the RACI diagnostic, they would have figured that out. They'd wasted all that time with me for absolutely no reason. And part of that is because they hadn't really done the homework on the account in the first place. And they would have had a better understanding what my real pain points were in the first place, or where to start digging had they done peak 1 first. So the very first part of this is flip the script to get the order right. We got to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that order. And then as Janelle highlighted, RACI is don't waste your time with C's and I's in the decision-making process. They matter at different points in the process, like implementation, but not during decisions when you're trying to get decisions on selection of suppliers or the products. In peak 2, make sure you know who the R's and A's are by name and by role. And then in peak 3, make sure that you can actually diagnose their score value language, because you don't want to bring them kitchen sink type, what I'll say, solutions. You want to be able to help them self-discover their own problems and needs, because that's what they're asking for. They're saying, hey, I have issues, I have needs, I I have issues, and don't solve something for me that I don't need. So help them see what they need that you happen to be able to solve for them, and then bring them a pinpoint solution that addresses that specific pain point that they have. Don't bring them the kitchen sink and hope one lands. That's why SCORE is so important. If somebody is operational, you're only going to bring them operational oriented solutions. If somebody's strategic, you're only going to bring them strategic oriented solutions. You don't bring them all of your stuff and hope it lands, because 80% of what you're saying won't land. So it's really important that you use the structure of SCORE to be precise with actually meeting their needs. That's the real construct here. And as Janelle mentioned in Peak 4, you've got a pre-mapped spreadsheet. Imagine the beauty of this. You'd have a pre-mapped spreadsheet of, for every one of your customer segments, you'd have a predefined set of customer problems sorted by SCORE, right? You and your marketing team would already have done this. You've already got voice of customer programs and everything else. You already know what those likely customer problems are in the context of your business that your sales team has then already got pre-mapped solutions to. So if you're dealing with somebody who is operational, as an example, all you're doing is asking them structured questions to help them self-discover the operational related challenges or problems that they have that you can likely solve for them. You're not wasting their time. You're not wasting your time. It's a more precise way of actually kind of bringing your solutions to the market and solving problems that they actually have. That's the 2, 3, 4 when we call it the juicy middle. So I'm going to pause there, and Hayes, let you kind of bring us the questions that folks might be asking.
Yeah, we got quite a few questions, so thanks.
Yeah, let's do it.
And really, really good here. But logistically, help me out here. I engage you. I'm a company with, 250 reps out there, and I'm interested in doing this and implementing this. How long would it take to implement this across my national accounts? It sounds like, is it complicated? Is it difficult? Kind of tell me, just kind of give me a little bit about what that looks like in order to categorize all my accounts.
Yeah, that's a really awesome question, Hayes. And it largely depends on, it's just ironic that we're on this slide, right? Because we didn't even talk about the thing on the right-hand side of this slide. What's on the right-hand side of this slide? And if you're talking about a company that's kind of large and complex, that has an organization with that many folks, then the stuff on the right really applies, which means methodology alone won't get you done. I mean, how many people have implemented, don't raise your hands. This is a rhetorical question, but have implemented Richardson or Miller Hyman or Brooks Group, and it becomes flavor of the day. And the reason why these methodologies become flavor of the day is because missing parts from the model on the right. Either we don't have the right talent management strategy in place, we don't have the right strategies in place, which is you haven't done segmentation, you don't have voice of customer programs in place, you don't have value prop infrastructure in place, you don't have that spreadsheet, like the actual, the customer problem solution spreadsheet in place to give to your sales team. Like, you don't have that infrastructure in place, or the right sales operations infrastructure in place, sales enablement in place. There's something missing on the right. So Hayes, it's a difficult thing to answer, because what we would normally do is come in and do a diagnostic, especially in a larger organization, to make sure the prerequisites are there on the right-hand side before we will implement sales methodology, so that we don't become flavor of the day. And this type of sales methodology is very healthcare specific, obviously, and it doesn't matter what somebody is using. It could even be Richardson. We've plugged into Richardson many times. This actually complements Richardson. It just goes deeper in, a couple of their phases. So generally speaking, it's a 6-month implementation of the methodology itself across a team of that size. And the way we roll it out is education, but then we actually then add on mentoring, because education is a great way to transfer knowledge. Hey, here's a new way of doing things. Everyone put people through classroom education, but then what we'll do is live account mentoring. Like, sit down people like Janelle right next to your sales leaders and your sales executives, and make sure that with live accounts, they're walking accounts right through this process, so that they actually get to learn on the job how to do the process.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. And also, as I look over my screen here, I see a good friend, Leanne Warren. She's here. I might even allow her to chime in here a little bit too, because some of you know Leanne, but Leanne was most recently Senior VP of Supply Chain. Did I just promote you? Were you VP or Senior VP?
VP. Yeah.
Okay, VP of Supply Chain at Fairview for many, many years. So she's also a wealth of knowledge. And so I might actually throw this out here, but this one question I thought was, I get this question literally daily. There's so many changes are happening in the provider organizations as we speak. How do you capture attention and earn the ability to be listened to? Where do you start? And maybe that's for Joe, Janelle, and Leanne, because both of y'all understand that. I'd be curious to see what you have to say about that.
Leanne, we've been talking. I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Well, I was looking at it a little bit more narrowly. I mean, Joe, Janelle, this is great information, and I love your framework. Thank you so much for sharing, Hayes, for setting this up. One of the things, especially as I've moved into independent consulting, I feel like I'm in a different place where I'm seeing some of the offerings from the suppliers from a new point of view. And I remember all of the challenges that we had in taking advantage of some of the I'll call them value-added services that the suppliers were offering. Maybe it didn't fit into how we were doing things in our organization, but I just feel like there's a lot of value that's sitting out there that can differentiate our suppliers, and a lot of offerings that the customers, the providers aren't necessarily taking advantage of. So I'm wondering what suppliers can do, but also how do we message that differently to customers so that they can benefit from these great services that are offered.
Which is back to the challenge, Joe. I mean, like trying to get that attention, right? I mean, I was talking to Janelle earlier. To me, it's a pandemic of status quo, pandemic of not having enough time. How do you get through all that to be seen, be heard? Joe, do you have a thought on that?
I do. And I mean, I'm not trying to, Steve, I'm looking at you because I think Steve does a great job of this, right? And I mean, I really want to acknowledge with a specific example. Steve wakes up every day and, it's like he checks in with people and says, how can I be in service to you? It's not what can I sell to you, but Steve wakes up every day and like reaches out to IDN customers or even people that are not his customers. I mean, he was reaching out to me before I was a customer, and he was always just asking, what can I do to be in service? And so it's not about pushing the sales agenda. It's especially when people are in crisis, it's just about actually being in service to that organization. And then of course, there are ways to actually learn how to ask structured questions to then get that person into more of what I would say the lane of your business, to go from macro questions to micro questions, right? So that you can ask them about, hey, what's going on in your world? And then by the time you're done, you're asking them about problems or challenges or headwinds or even opportunities that are more specific to your business. But you start wide, and then you eventually, in the course of that conversation, get to this place where it becomes more narrowed in. And there's a way to do that just with rapport building alone. I think Steve is really, really wonderful at doing this. And I would always take his phone calls. I mean, always, but by the end of the conversation, I mean, it was likely that we were going to end up talking about Sage by the end of that conversation. And it never felt like a violation of trust in that conversation because it was just seamless in how Steve managed that conversation. Can you learn how to do that? Yes. We have a question structure that we can teach you in sales as to how to do that. And I don't know of any supply chain leader that wouldn't welcome that, because no one's reaching out to them like Steve is doing. What's happening is people are saying, hey, I've got the world's greatest mousetrap, and I've got this quota I've got to reach for the next quarter. So if you just give me 15 minutes of your life, I can sell it to you, and I promise it's going to change your life. And they're like, no, I have no time for that, because they're overwhelmed by that all day long. And for every person like Steve that calls them, they have 100 people like the other calling them.
Well, that's really good. Steve, you're going to be the next host to our next presentation.
I'm sorry, Steve, you're just on video, and it doesn't mean that there's others, not here that don't do the same thing, but I'm looking right at Steve, and I'm like, Steve is just such a model of this.
We're going to jump to another question, but let me just throw this out there. I did an interview that'll post early January with a supply chain exec. Well, I did it yesterday. He told me he gets 700 emails a day. 700, guys. He has, it's a big shop. I mean, but he says roughly half of those are internal. The other half are external. So got to be unique, got to be different, got to bring value. To your point, Joe, I think it's really good. And this is a good one. Dan Blucher, known Dan forever. And it's really kind of, I think this is a multifaceted question, because we have issues now with remote teams. Hospitals are working remote, and they're not all in one building anymore. You also have a lot of corporations where you have all the decisions made at corporate in Chicago with hundreds of hospitals elsewhere. But is a field sales team really necessary in today's environment with many IDNs have their supply chain team working remotely and with limited access and those things? Any take on that, you guys, and what do you think? Because I do think that's a very valuable question. And I'm sure, obviously, if you're a field sales rep, you think it's vital to be out there, and it probably is. But I'd be curious of what you think about that with so much roll up going on.
Janelle, I might show this slide, right, and maybe have you pile onto it. What we would say is get the strategy right and segment your customers the right way, and it looks something like this. Even in today's market, there's still 5,500 hospitals that are out there, and I recognize the bigger getting bigger. But the reality is, if you were to look at your top 50 accounts, so small number of accounts represent a disproportionate amount of your revenue potential. And we don't often think about it this way, but you've got to give them a disproportionate amount of your resources and time and attention. That doesn't mean that there's not opportunity with the rest of the IDN space and the rest of the actual hospital space of the acute care market, because you want to cover the whole landscape, but you don't want to cover it exactly the same way. And even with the methodology that we just outlined, does the methodology apply to key accounts, IDNs, and field sales? Yes, but not with the same level of rigor, right? It wouldn't be worth the same level of rigor. You can't dig in to a, let's say a local hospital, a regional hospital, the same way you would justify digging into Mayo Clinic. I mean, it would make way more sense as a key account to dig into Mayo Clinic and really understand them inside out with a very focused team, because again, the juice is going to be worth the squeeze. So same process, different level of rigor. So Hayes, I mean, I think the short answer is yes, we think there's an absolute role for field sales, but we do think that the accounts should be segmented and the resources that are applied against those accounts should also be segmented. And we would even go so far to say, and we don't even think key accounts should be segmented by geography. We should actually challenge that assumption to begin with. So no, I don't want to.
Yeah, no, thanks, Joe, for bringing that up, because I think it's important, if you really go back to assessing your IDN and you're segmenting properly, you're more experienced, or let's say a key account director who has been very successful with a large progressive IDN might be a better match, even though it's not geographical. So I would just, invite suppliers to think about that, match the profile of the account and closely align it with the skill set of the key account director. It really works.
All right, I've got another question I'm going to come to as it relates to inflation, but before that, this one popped up, and I think it's just kind of in line with where we're going. Where is it? It's my customers seem like they're stuck in firefighting mode. It makes it very challenging to have meaningful conversations. How do you do it? How do you get through? This is right back to the same question, Joe or Leanne or any other providers that are on here that I don't recognize or don't know right off.
Leanne, I'd love for you to weigh in. We've done these interviews, right? These 550 interviews. What we would say is that there's 3 different type of leader personas out there, probably not just, in supply chain. I think it applies to all leadership. And it gets emphasized, highlighted, maybe even exaggerated during crisis. The first is a crisis leader, the smoke jumper that jumps out of the plane and puts out the fire. And they run from crisis to crisis to crisis. In fact, they'll even start a crisis when there isn't one. They've always been a crisis leader. And so now that they're in a crisis, yes, it's like whack-a-mole every day. And when you try to interact with them, that's what it's going to sound like. And then you have your operational leaders, right, who are the ones who run their entire operation by dashboards. If it can't be measured, it can't be managed, right? You almost think about the mantras that these folks live by. Not the same persona as the crisis leader. This is a person who everything's got to be organized and structured. They're the first ones to stand up the control towers. Very different leader. Then you've got your strategic leaders, who are the folks who formed HERC, right? They actually solved a problem bigger than their own organization during crisis. I mean, they thought bigger than themselves right in the middle of a crisis. Think about how different those 3 leaders are. So I know that it's very frustrating when you're trying to deal with, a leader who's playing whack-a-mole, but I also would invite us to back up and recognize that not all leaders are the same, and we need to adapt our style to different styles of leaders. So you don't bring strategic type solutions to a crisis leader. You bring crisis-like solutions to a crisis leader. This is all about personalization and personalizing your approach to these different types of leaders. Leanne, I would certainly welcome your contributions. I mean, having been a supply chain leader and knowing many of the supply chain leaders.
Hey, Joe, thanks for the opportunity. It's interesting. I'm really liking this conversation that we're having today. The ability to talk strategically is like such a welcome relief. So I totally agree with and Steve, you're just going to get all kinds of kudos today. But over the years, I've really enjoyed my conversations with you because I do think it's looking at a much bigger picture. It's not just looking at the products that are being sold. And when I think about the last few years, the whack-a-mole comment, I cannot tell you how many times I used that phrase over the last few years of which crisis I was fighting. And, thinking about it from the supplier's perspective and just encouraging these strategic conversations. I know you need to meet the customer where they are, but it's actually a welcome opportunity to step out of that day-to-day and be thinking strategically again. And part of that is a part of why I stepped away from the provider side of things. I was looking for something bigger to do and more strategic. So I just think that that's such a valuable conversation that can be had with the supplier. And ultimately, I think that'll lead to more business opportunities for the suppliers as well.
Awesome. Leanne, I actually really honor you for saying that. And I think that's the hidden gem in this conversation, right? There are so many leaders who have been trapped in an environment where they have to behave and show up as a crisis leader, but it is not their preference, right? And so if you know them well enough and you know that they're a strategic leader, you will be able to stop them in their tracks by checking in with them and having that strategic conversation. It's a welcomed relief. That's why SCORE is so important as well. Strategic is one of the SCORE value languages. So if you want to come in and just talk economics with a strategic leader, they would be highly offended that you would diminish the conversation to only the economics because they want to have the strategic conversation with you. If somebody is clinical, and I'm not talking about their position, I'm talking about their SCORE value language, and all you want to talk about is the operational merits of your offering, again, it will not land with them. So being able to diagnose accurately what their true SCORE value language is, and then you only talk to them in that language, they will always take your call. But if you're trying to talk to them only in your preference, then only 20% of the time you do an outreach is somebody going to actually interact with you, because only 20% of the time are you likely to interact with somebody that is the same language as yours, right? Because you have your own SCORE value language too as a default setting, just like love languages.
I didn't think we'd be talking about love languages today.
I know, it's wild.
That
Although those that know me, Jared knows. I see Jared Darlington on here. He's like, oh, here we are again with the love language.
If my wife were to walk in, she's like, what are you doing? But all right, guys, we're basically up at the number here. All right, Joe, if a company wanted to get in contact with you, what size company? Kind of just tell me the profile of what you look for. Does it matter of size, scope, industry? I mean, obviously, it's healthcare, but kind of give me a little feel for that right fast in about 45 seconds.
Yep, sure. We tend to do really well, first of all, healthcare for sure. And when you're trying to, I would say there's two profiles. First profile is big, messy, conglomerate, big company with lots of solutions, lots of products, selling historically clinically oriented products historically to clinicians. And you're recognizing now that supply chain is this kind of like crazy customer that you don't understand well enough. That we do really well with those types of organizations because we help you learn how to coexist and sell into and through supply chain, not to circumvent them, but to better understand them with a lot of empathy and compassion. And the second profile is an organization that's single device and or a software company or a technology company, right? So a totally different demographic altogether. And again, you can't get supply chain's attention because supply chain wakes up every day and they're in service to their internal stakeholders, but not to themselves, right? So you can't get their attention. We tend to do really well with those two demographics.
Perfect. And so what we're going to do, guys, we're going to wrap this PDF, this PowerPoint in a PDF. I'll get this out along with the replay so you can share with your teams. Hopefully we'll get that out Monday, Tuesday. Please share it, freely with everybody. Also, quickly, now you've talked today, Leanne, how can someone get hold of you? Obviously, you're out there helping some customers do some sales and consulting as well.
Oh, Hayes, you're so awesome. I am out doing independent consulting these days. So if anybody wants to find me, I'm out there on LinkedIn. So it's Leanne at leannerborn.com as well. Thanks, Hayes.
She's fantastic. And last thing, if y'all got a second, Steve Anderson, you still here? There you are. I see you. I've actually had two people just reach out. They wanted to hear you talk about maybe your relationship journey with maybe providers and how you maybe do it. And obviously you're free to go. Obviously we're done with the presentation because Joe and Janelle, I'll get that out, their presentation I'll get out. But if you're willing to share that, Steve, or just maybe some concepts there, I think everybody would enjoy to hear that.
Sure, Hayes. One, thank you, Joe and Leanne, for the kind words. I really appreciate it. I've learned so much from these two individuals over my career, and I can't thank them enough for the influence they've had and taught me a lot of hard lessons. I think in my journey, I've always started with customer first and what are their pain points? What are their goals? I learned it from Joe when he was at Intermountain. Boy, if you didn't line up with their goals, you were really wasting your time. And we wasted a lot of each other's time, I think, early on until we really understood that concept as a company. And so we kind of reoriented and really started with the problem first, or what are their pain points? And it changed how receptive people were to talking to us because we're there to solve their problems. It wasn't about selling more products. And it was really the outcome was measured on how well we're doing solving their problems. And they were much more receptive to that than just walking in with the feature and benefit around some new product. And those are kind of the themes that we've used and had a lot of fun doing it. Very gratifying to see when you do help them solve their problems, how welcome they are the next time you reach out to them. And maybe you've got another problem that you've identified that you can help solve. So that's really, and I thank Joe and Leanne. They've been tremendous mentors for me over my career. So I appreciate it.
Well, great advice. In my interviews and discussions with a bunch of providers, it's that transparency on the front end. Don't lie. Make sure you show up. If you've got back orders, you expect back orders, make sure they know. Sometimes be a resource that's not with your own company. I've heard that many times. You might have a product or something that just doesn't fit their problem today, but someone else does. Help them out, be a resource. And you know what? I'm a believer that everything kind of comes back to you if you help. And so anyway, really good advice there, Steve. Thanks for sharing that. Joe, Janelle, y'all were fantastic. Leanne, thanks so much. Thanks for everybody. Obviously, it's lit up over here, my chat. And so I appreciate everybody that chimed in. As I put a little chat a while ago, reach out to Joe, Janelle, also Leanne on LinkedIn is me as well. It's just easier to communicate, frankly, if I'm with you there. So thank you so much. Thanks. Have a good Friday afternoon. Great session. I'll hang around for a while, but I know everybody's got to jump. But thank you very much. And Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and everything else. So thanks, everybody.